And weather. All right? We can't control the weather. All right? We can't. But we always go outside at Parkway Central. We do. And then I'm going to give you guys data here in a second where I literally have the temperature and the conditions on the day, not only the test. Because when you're looking at the data and you get into these funny tiny little numbers, you're like, why is this? Okay? Location is very important. I want to do the test under as similar conditions as possible every time. I had a wonderful educator. He wasn't a great coach yet, but he was a wonderful educator. And one year, all of a sudden, a bunch of my athletes improved by an enormous margin in the standing long jump. And I'm like, man, we had a good winter in the weight room. We had good winter conditioning and all this kind of stuff that we do in my training system. Like, that's pretty awesome, man. This is pretty unexpected. And then I realized that coach had never done that test before. And I'm thinking, why all of a sudden is it about a foot farther than everyone last year? A foot. Where was he measuring it from? The front of the foot. So the data was wrong. So I had to subtract, about 12 inches off of every one of the jumps to get more of a realistic piece of information. So location matters. Who's doing the test matters. Having the same people do the test every time. Because what you want is the flaws to be the same flaws. So then the longitudinal data can make more sense for you over time. You want them to be under similar conditions. If you run into a headwind on a standing 30, you need to try to find where the headwind is at every time you do a standing 30 so that your data can be accurate. By the way, you should do that anyway. Run your flies and your standings into wind if you're going outside. Because even though we want our kids to improve, you also want them to have improvements pretty quickly so that they feel good about themselves and they're empowered and they feel like they're getting better, even if the amount that they're getting better is pretty minor, but then they all of a sudden show a big jump because all of a sudden it's got sunny and the weather's good, okay? Because here's the deal. Belief is the most powerful performance-enhancing drug we have. If the kid believes, okay, it's going to outdo creatine, protein shakes, and a Red Bull every time, okay? Without a doubt. Without a doubt. So you got to make sure you're doing that, okay? So those are things you need to be aware of. So Tony Wells, Tony Holler, Mike Hurst, they have a battery of tests that they run their athletes through over and over and over again. Some people will change the test, so that way it's not like the same test, because maybe you get a backup of data. Like, here's a weird thing. The better that a 400-meter athlete gets, the faster they get. They've done science tests on this. Their VO2 max gets worse, which Tony will tell you there's a reason for that. It's because it's not nearly as aerobic anymore, because they're not using as much of it. But if you were testing for that, the kids would start thinking, oh my God, all of a sudden I'm not getting as good. If you feel like you can't guarantee that the test is going to get the result for the belief that you want, or they're not ready, you darn well better have your approach set up to let them know, hey, these are the conditions, this is the situation, here's the deal, we just had a really rough week of practice, or we had a 2-day track meet, your data might not be where you think it is. Just like the guys who are football guys who are like, oh, why's my squat gone down or my bench gone down in track season? Because you just had an hour and a half track practice. Your bench is going to go down. Your squat is going to go down because we're not squatting. We're not benching. It's not weightlifting season. It's track and field season. And then in the summer, your numbers are going to go up because all the speed and power that you're developing when you're fresh will show up on that day. But that's not why we're doing track and field, to improve our squat and bench numbers. In fact, a lot of times, those are inverse when you get to a certain point. Okay? So Mike Hurst, what he'll do is like every 6 weeks, he's got a testing phase. Every 6 weeks. Tony Wells, it's every 21 days. They test. Every 21 days. Now, the difference between Tony and Mike is a long sprint guy. Okay? He's a long sprint guy, a 400-meter specialist. He's coached all the Australian record holders in the 400. He's had numerous Olympians and Olympic finalists. And then Tony Wells is a short sprint speed guy, short to short guy. So if you're a short to short person, that testing is really important to have more frequency. If you're a longer person, you probably don't need the test as often, and probably that data isn't going to be what you want without larger chunks of time before you retest. So depending on your philosophy, that's important. Changing the test throughout the years, like we mentioned, you might want to do that. I will do my standing and flying 30s within the first week, and then about a month in to the season, we'll do our time trials. And then what I try to do is I try to have as many open, unlimited entry JV meets, and I kind of use that as testing for my athletes outside of their primary events. In the winter, you're probably going to do a lot more testing to keep your kids interested. And here's the other thing. Not all PRs are created the same. Okay? Let me repeat that. Not all PRs are created the same. So having a single PR is exciting, but again, who was taking the test? What was the conditions like? What was the weather like? Did they have a vacation? Did they just meet a new beautiful girlfriend? What was going on? Okay? Because all of that will change your data. So personally for me, what I adhere to is what's called rolling PRs. So as you continue to do these tests, if you're doing the same test over and over and over again, a PR is nice, but an improved rolling average is better. Because that means it's repeatable. Dan Path, who's a big mentor of mine, amazing coach, super smart, almost too smart. One of the things that he talks about is when a PR shows up, that actually scares him. Because the kid is going to be hungry, they're going to push harder, they're going to try to extend the things that they think in their head allowed for that PR to happen, and then they overreach and they get hurt. So one of the things that Dan says when he sees a PR is he goes, for the next week or 2 weeks, we don't change anything about our training. We don't adjust times, we don't adjust weight room lift percentages, we don't adjust speed, we don't adjust density, everything's the same. Because I want to stabilize that new person. I want to know that that data actually is telling me what I think it's telling me. And so, you've got to think about that too when we're talking about it. Also, do you record them? Do you videotape them? Again, they could set a PR and they're freaking doing this and looking like they're, I don't know. They've been touched by the Holy Spirit, I don't know if you've ever seen that in some churches. People start, they get touched by the Holy Spirit. I always wonder to myself, like, why does God have such bad rhythm? You'd think if it was, he'd have you popping and locking. But anyway, all right, if you got a kid who's all over the place, yay, I'm so glad you ran really fast, or you lifted really heavy, or you had a new distance in your 23-second test, but I bet tomorrow you're going to feel like crap. Because it was ugly how you got there. So we're happy that you pushed this huge performance, but it wasn't a clean performance. So now we got to go back and address how do we get that to look the way that the measurement says it should look. So if it doesn't fly right, it's probably not safe. So we got to work on that while these improvements are happening. Just like if you would get a huge lift on the deadlift, and you're cranking that thing out, but you've got a funky position and it isn't clean. Hey, I'm so glad you got that new lift PR, but you almost blew your back out in the process. I'd really like you to be able to lift that and look a lot sharper and a lot cleaner with better technique. Okay. All right, so what tests?